Hi, everybody. I am here with Eileen, one of my good friends, who is going to talk to us about the impact of mental illness on her students. Eileen, if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do at Dahlin Elementary School, which is located in Arlington, Mass.
Sure. So thank you, Allison. My name is Eileen Delory. I am a special education teacher in Arlington, Massachusetts. I work at the Dallin Elementary School, and I work in a substantially separate special ed program for students with social and emotional disabilities. So we call ourselves the therapeutic program.
Awesome. And you're in a public school?
Yep, it's a public school setting, but it is a substantially separate program. So we have students from any elementary school in Arlington who need more than 60% of their day with specialized support outside of the gen ed classroom.
Awesome. All right, we will jump right into our questions. My first question is, how would you describe your role in childhood mental illness? It's a broad question.
Yeah. So I think in my role specifically, the relationship I have with the students is significantly important, especially students who struggle with mental health. Just being a trusted adult at school is really, really important. My students experience a lot of big feelings and they need a lot of co-regulation. So me being there with them, talking them through how to come back down to baseline. I also think our homeschool connection, so my ability to maintain a connection between what's going on at home and what's going on at school, is super, super important to mental health. Just knowing something as little as that one of my kiddos' moms couldn't get him to eat in the morning is so important for me to know when he walks in my classroom door that that's something I need to keep in the back of my mind, that this kid is probably hungry on top of everything else that he's trying to manage throughout his school day. So I think as a special education teacher, and specifically in my role with this population of students, could have a great impact on their mental health.
And how many students are in your classroom?
So I have 4 students in my classroom.
Okay.
I have 2 first grade students and 2 second grade students.
Okay.
Yep.
So my next question is, what role do you think mental health plays in the child's academic and social life?
So mental health is one of those things that is often invisible, and I think especially for students in the lower grades, while they're very forgiving of each other, a lot of times it's difficult to understand why someone might be reacting in a way that they are. So I think providing kids with as much support for mental health as we can in the school setting is just really, really important so that they can develop healthy relationships with other kiddos and so that they are able to access the academic content that they need to access, as well as the skill building, the emotional skill building that they need to access.
Do you find that kids that are in a typically functioning classroom interact well with the kids that you teach?
Yeah, I mean, the kids specifically at my school, and I'm sure this is the case everywhere, but they are so, so great with my students. They're so understanding. We do a lot of work with the social workers as well and the general education teachers, just proactively, just about, everyone being different. And, some people need more help learning how to read. Some people need more help learning, their math facts. And some kids need help learning how to be safe if they lose a game, or to handle not being first in line. We're all working on different things. And the kids at my school are so, so, so great. I couldn't ask for better role models and friends for my kids. So I'm so appreciative of that.
That's awesome. third question, what challenges do you think you as a special education teacher face that other teachers might not?
I think as a special education teacher, you find yourself trying to wear many, many different hats. For me, I find myself putting on the social work hat often throughout the day. And there's just a lot of, or not a lot of downtime. So I think even, if my kids are at recess and lunch, when that's a typical teacher's break time, that's for my students one of the hardest parts of their day, that unstructured time. So even though it might technically be my lunchtime, I often am called to support a crisis, whether it be for my students or another student. So I think that need to support in a crisis and the unpredictability of when those crises may come can be challenging for special education teachers.
And number 4, what are the most common diagnoses in your classroom?
So my students carry a variety of diagnoses. Most carry DMDD, so disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, anxiety, ADHD. Those are the 3 common diagnoses that I see for my kiddos.
Okay. Do you notice that children with autism experience struggles and ADHD with their writing, with their what you would call dysgraphia?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've reached out to many people about this because this is my 3rd year teaching, but I feel like writing is most challenging for my students specifically. And I think a lot of it does have to do with what they're working with ADHD and anxiety. There's just so much to the writing process, and I think it requires so much regulation that getting my kids to sit down, to think of what they want to say, to initiate the writing process, like even just picking up the pencil and getting ready to write. One of my kiddos who struggles with anxiety is so concerned with his letter formation being perfect that impacts it as well. And, he's in 2nd grade, and many 2nd graders are writing 5-10 sentences in a session, and he's struggling to get 2 out. And it's not that he is struggling with how to express himself verbally. Like if he could tell me a story with a beginning, middle, end, organized, great. But as soon as it involves paper, pencil, he really, really struggles with it. And that's across the board.
That kind of leads me to my next question. Do you have any preferred interventions or strategies that you utilize as a teacher to help kids with ADHD and autism?
Yeah, so I would say having visual schedules is tremendously helpful to my students, and visual schedules that are then broken down into further visual schedules. So for example, just knowing that writing is coming after math often is not enough for my students. They need writing broken down into even simpler steps so that they can anticipate when the work block will be over. My students do really well when they know what they're working for and when they can anticipate a choice time coming, because initiating and persisting through non-preferred activities, so writing, especially since it's challenging for them, is really, really tricky. So visual schedules, I work with the occupational therapist on a sensory diet for my students, so that they can get the sensory input they need, whether it be through heavy work activities that break up their day.
Back to the students that struggle with writing, do you allow them to write on an iPad or a computer?
Yeah, so we do some keyboarding, but that is a challenge in itself, just getting kids used to keyboarding. So we're working on that. We have a really great assistive tech specialist who got us a few different apps that they could use on their iPads with modified keyboards. So with vowels highlighted and predictive text, that's very, very helpful for my students. And some of the assistive tech apps actually read the writing back out as students are working. So that helps with the spelling piece, with the independence piece. So I'm not having to sit with each student. They can feel some ownership and some independence over their writing. So assistive tech is definitely huge for writing with my kiddos.
Awesome. My last question I have, the article that we looked at for this presentation, there was no significant differences in the neuropsychological functioning, such as learning, attention, writing, and processing speed for those students with anxiety and depression, as well as ODD. I was surprised by that, and I think just based on our previous conversations, you do see children that struggle with anxiety and how that impacts their academic performance. So if you could just talk a little bit about that, maybe share an example of a child you might have in your classroom now.
Yeah, that is interesting that that's what that article shares, because I agree. I find the opposite true for many of my students, especially my students with anxiety. I'm thinking specifically of one of my first grade boys who just the thought as far as participating in any direct instruction or any activity, if it seems unfamiliar to him, if it looks new, if it looks too challenging, if he perceives anything is going to be too hard or he's going to fail, he immediately becomes very dysregulated. And so I think that for sure impacts his ability to access learning, to access curriculum, to access interventions. It requires a lot of, we're doing our best to help him work through, what to do, what to say to yourself when you're feeling like this. But I think students with anxiety, students with depression, students with ODD, it definitely affects their learning.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Eileen. I really appreciate it. I can definitely tell that your kids are lucky to have someone like you supporting them.